and bringing that down. Now, I'm kind of a student of history, and I have to go back to the early 60s and beyond, right up to present day. The 10 lower, a sure way to do it is to lessen economic growth. I'm sure he
Yeah,
doesn't
and
want to do that.
yeah, that's the conundrum here, right? You want to bring rates down, but at the end of the day, there is correlation there between the strength of the economy and the interest rate environment and the yield curve and how the yield curve behaves. The Fed doesn't have the power it thinks it has to control that. I mean, we've seen that in recent months with the Fed cutting and yet yield curve not behaving like rates have been cut. In fact, it's to be expected, right? Because you want to get out of an inverted yield curve, which requires the longer end to go up, even in a cutting cycle. But I think that the problem here and what they're trying to kind of fix is related to mortgage rates in the housing market. And I don't know that there's an easy fix to that. But I am concerned that there's this belief that if they just cut rates enough, they can fix this problem, because I think it's not that black and white. And there's a high probability of a potential mistake being made if they go in with policy decisions thinking that it is that easy.
Shana, I know you work with your clients talking about alternative investments here. Where do you see the greatest opportunity in alternatives here? Private equity, private credit, hedge funds? Where are you spending most of your time these days?
So more hedge fund like strategies. Private equity, private credit are kind of sensitive to the interest rate environment and also sensitive to public market betas. In the hedge fund world, especially if you believe that there's going to be increased volatility, hedge funds and hedge fund like strategies are great diversifiers. So, for example, last week there's a ETF BTAL. It's the AGF US Anti Beta Fund. It's long low beta, short high beta. That product did remarkably well when we had the big DeepSeek threat sell off. And that's exactly what you want in those types of products, and that's what hedge fund like strategies can do, is provide you that downside protection when the market is under significant stress. Managed futures is another example, like a CTA ETF. And then when you move into the hedge fund space where they can use leverage more as a tool, you can get even greater benefit as a diversifier and as a downside protector. But it's not sexy, and people forget that, like, these aren't meant to outperform the market. They serve a purpose in your portfolio. I like to think of it as like home insurance. Like, you hope you never have to use it, but you would never not have it, because you need to be able to manage the risk. And that's exactly how I see those types of strategies. This year, I think, is the year where these types of strategies are really going to show their worth, because I think the markets are going to be quite volatile.
Shana, thank you so much for joining us. Always appreciate getting a few minutes of your time. Shana Sissel, President and CEO of Banrion Capital Management, joining us here talking about the broader market share. One of the big movers in the marketplace today is Roblox, the game company. Stock is down 11%. It was down more than 20% earlier in the trading day. Bookings missed. Outlook a little bit softer than expected. Let's get some details on that. We can do that. The Mandeep Singh, he's a senior technology analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. Mandeep, describe what Roblox does, and then what's happening with the stock today.
I mean, this is a platform, think of it as a walled garden where you can play any user-generated game, as well as, the AAA titles and all sorts of gaming content hosted inside Roblox platform where multiple users can play the game.
66.
It's been quite popular, with that demographic, the 9 to 17, 18-year-olds.
It's a great way to entice somebody to do their homework. It really is.
Yeah,
it works.
The use case is beyond
you
gaming.
You could spend 20 minutes doing this, after you do your homework or whatever.
Yeah, and so I think, again, user growth of 20% plus, and anytime you see a company missing on user growth,
yep,
the reaction is pretty strong. Now, if you remember, there was a report from Hindenburg talking about how the user and engagement metrics are inflated. So pretty much the company has been, doing the cleanup post that report, even though they didn't really acknowledge, there were a large number of users.
Were they faking those numbers, or they're just so difficult to
I think
ascertain?
the problem with online platforms is it's so hard to figure out exactly, what's bot activity and where are the user metrics inflated or engagement, and there's always scope to, clean up and have real users being reflected on the platform. In the case of Roblox, brand safety is a big aspect because, we were talking about kids using the platform. So they've really, I think, done a lot since that short thesis from Hindenburg, and that's partly the reason why they missed in terms of the user and engagement metrics. But they called out Eastern Europe being weak and Turkey being weak. To me, this is really the quarter where the impact was the most obvious, and then it will gradually get better because they've cleaned up.
So it seems like at least a partial vindication for the Hindenburg research.
Well, I could make the case even for a platform like Snap, where you may have they have shown 100 million daily active users every quarter. Now, do they really have 100 million, or is it more 97 million because 3 million are just captured in their metrics? So no one has a consistent approach.
There's not a third party. Ratings. There's no third party to verify.
There is no third party.
Right.
It's the company that's giving you the metrics, and I don't think there is like a consistent approach that every company uses in terms of giving out their daily active user count.
Beyond the daily active users, what are the other important metrics that you need to look at?
Engagement also was
Like-
kind of a slight miss.
Well, in radio, it's time spent listening. Is that this sort of the same thing?
Yeah. So
Okay.
I look at what they are doing on the AI side. They are looking to develop their own foundational model. So think of it as what the LLM companies are doing. It's a walled garden where they will create all sorts of tools to enable more content. It's similar to YouTube in some sense. YouTube has got a lot of video content. Roblox has got a lot of gaming content and other things for that demographic. So net, I mean, this seems to be a justified reaction because they missed on their numbers, but has the thesis really changed because they're losing share? I don't think so.
And real quick, have the safety concerns as a parent, have they been fully addressed?
That's what they're trying to address, and that's why they missed on these metrics. So
Okay,
they're using a combination of AI tools as well as just focusing more on brand safety because they want to ramp up ads. And the way you ramp up ads is you want to guarantee the advertisers that it's a safe platform to advertise on.
Mandeep Singh, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Mandeep Singh, Senior Technology Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence, joining us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. Coming up, Bloomberg Television's Salia Mohsin speaks with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent at 1 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Television and radio, and we will bring you that important conversation as global Wall Street increases its knowledge of Mr. Bessent and the policies that could be acting in global financial markets. S&P 500, it's up 11 points, 13 points. This is Bloomberg.
Shut down the doors. They brought down banners. They put thousands of people on leave. This is not a reform. This is an attack. And USAID is just the beginning. It's USAID now. It's the Department of Education next. And it's an attack on our entire democratic government system.
Wired reports employees of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, have received orders to pause all international engagements amidst concerns the scientific agency could also soon face mass firings and have its mission throttled, including its work on developing wind energy. Meanwhile, workers of color at the Health and Human Services Department fear they could be directly targeted after their names and photos were published on a website called DEI Watch List, created by the American Accountability Foundation. The list of workers claims their so-called offenses include working on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and using pronouns in their bios. Democratic Congress members Judy Chu and Gwen Moore confronted House Speaker Mike Johnson Wednesday, showing up at his office during his meeting with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent to demand answers on Elon Musk's team gaining access to the Treasury Department's payment system. The lawmakers say Johnson hid Scott Bessent from them. In the Senate, Hawaii Democrat Brian Schatz led an overnight filibuster against the confirmation of Project 2025 architect Russell Vought to head the Office of Management and Budget.
All of us, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, the media, which is so damn casual about what is happening, we have to understand that when you're in the middle of the fight, you're not sure if this is a historic moment. When you read about it in the past, you can identify that historic moment. When you observe it in a faraway place with a hard-to-pronounce name, you can identify what's happening, creeping fascism.
A coalition of labor groups filed a lawsuit Wednesday to prevent DOGE, Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, for attempting to take over the Labor Department and gaining access to its data. The agency holds sensitive data, likely including worker complaints against Musk and his companies. The plaintiffs include the AFL-CIO, that's the American Federation of Government Employees as well, Service Employees International Union, and the Economic Policy Institute. Labor Department workers rallied in D.C. Wednesday against an expected incursion by Elon Musk, joined by Democratic lawmakers. This is Michigan Congressmember Rashida Tlaib.
We don't get the benefits and the support and the protections, but for the fact that workers organize and they
just above $97,000.
don't get it, we shut it down. Shut it down. Shut it down.
In more labor news, a former board member of the National Labor Relations Board, Gwen Wilcox, filed a lawsuit calling her firing by President Trump last month unprecedented and illegal, asking a federal court to reinstate her. NLRB members are Senate.
I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pell, thank you so much. We appreciate that. John Tucker sitting in for Alex Steele today. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. So head over to youtube.com, search Bloomberg Podcast Live, and that's where you'll find us nice and easy. Tariffs, uncertain when they will be implemented, to what degree they will be implemented, but certainly industries. I'm looking at a story here about Puma sneakers. They're importing fewer sneakers made in China to the U.S. They're now going to Vietnam and Indonesia. So it's impacting the sneaker business. It's also impacting the global aerospace business. And for that, George Ferguson joins us. We won't ask him about sneakers, but we are going to ask him about, he covers all the aerospace stuff for Bloomberg Intelligence. George, talk to us about kind of how the global aerospace business is thinking about U.S. tariffs on China, on Canada, on Mexico, and maybe the European Union.
Yeah, so, from a China and Mexico perspective, I think at least on the large commercial side, sort of thinking about Boeing, it's probably not much impact. There's some supply chain activity down in Mexico, a bit in Canada, but really not a large portion of the airplanes. So I think not a big effect there. If tariffs go to Europe, I think then we have a much bigger issue, right? Because we saw this during the first Trump administration. right? If Airbus is trying to deliver airplanes into the U.S.,
Welcome to
on them as they come in. The airlines will not want that tariff. They'll push back on Airbus, ask them to eat that tariff, or maybe find another jurisdiction to take delivery of the airplane in. And if you get retaliatory tariffs, you have this supply chain that's very integrated. GE, for example, they build their jet engines, the most used jet engine in the world, the LEAP, and the CFM56 for that matter. They build it partially in France and partially in the U.S. And so you get sort of components moving between the two countries. That's going to be a big challenge.
Oh, and I forgot, Canada makes planes too, right? Bombardier.
Yeah, so one of the bigger issues is Bombardier, right? They reported earnings today. They pulled guidance because on the small jet, the biz jet side, the supply chain is very U.S. focused, and the customer base is very U.S. focused. We're the biggest consumers of private aviation. So Bombardier, to ship airplanes into the U.S. for delivery to customers, those customers have to pay a 25% tariff on that airplane. And the supply chain, if there's retaliatory tariffs, the supply chain ends up getting taxed as well, you know, as you send engines and avionics over to Canada to put it into the airplane. So they pulled guidance today. They're probably the most affected because there's another 4 manufacturers. Gulfstream is one, U.S. based. Textron Cessna, another U.S. based. Dassault out of France, but they also have a big defense business and more international scope to their bizjet business. So they get hurt, but not as bad. And Embraer, you know, Brazilian, we're not hearing a lot about tariffs on Brazil. They do assemble some in the U.S., so probably less affected. So Bombardier is probably the worst affected in aerospace.
Hey, George, we also heard from President Trump this morning talking about the air traffic control system here in the U.S., talking about new systems for air traffic controls, perhaps in response to that terrible crash in Washington, D.C. last week. Can you talk to us about air traffic control system and kind of where it can be improved? Is it a technology story? Is it a personnel story? What do you know about that?
The technology story has been around for a long time in air traffic control. A lot of the computers that the controllers are using are pretty antiquated. From time to time, they've come in and tried to update them, but it seems like they're perennially behind the curve in automating, air traffic control. And so I think this is probably a great opportunity for the U.S. to invest for the long haul in its airspace and really put a bunch of money into it, right? The government's always got these competing objectives, right? The budgets are always tight, and I think air traffic control seems to work. We haven't had many accidents. And so, the investments there sort of always seem to get pushed off a bit and not fully implemented. So it would be great to see the president prioritize air traffic control. I think it would help with situations we had in Washington, D.C. The other day, although I think these Army training flights that move along that Reagan corridor are probably best put somewhere else. But it does feel like the controller was sort of juggling heavy traffic periods there. Looking for the Army helicopter to recognize and avoid that CRJ that was coming in for a landing. Seems like better systems could probably help out in that controller workload.
George, thanks so much. As always, great stuff from you. George Ferguson, Senior Aerospace Defense and Airline Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. He is also an Army veteran, so we thank him for his service. And of course, the highlight of his career, the peak of his career, was he went to Penn State.
Oh,
It's been downhill.
of course.
Our good friend,
And working for you.
Exactly. So he's our go-to person on aerospace, defense, and the airlines. Coming up in just a moment, Salim Ramji, Vanguard CEO, sitting down with Bloomberg Television's anchor Katie Greifeld, talking about the asset management business and the fees on the
Is
ETF.
fee war ETFs now?
Yeah, I mean, I saw they're lowering their fees on their ETF to 7 basis points, 0.07%. I don't know how the economics work there, but they certainly work for the Vanguard folks because they rake in tons and tons of assets, and all that funds flow going to ETFs. It's just an extraordinary story. Just over the last, seems like 10, 15 years, it's been just an.
When I think of Vanguard, I think of the late Jack Bogle.
Yes,
and what was he all about? He was all about the investor.
Yep, low fees. Salim Ramji, Vanguard CEO, with coming up in just a moment with Katie Greifeld. Looking at the market, S&P up 13 points, the Dow minus 90, and the NASDAQ up 43. So red and green on the screen here. We'll stay on top of that. Got the gold futures pulling back a little bit. 10-year Treasury yields 4.45%. Right now, let's go live. Bloomberg's TV's anchors, Katie Greifeld. She sits down with Salim Ramji, Vanguard CEO, talking about ETFs and asset management. Let's take a listen.
Our TV and radio audiences worldwide. I'm pleased to say we're joined by Vanguard CEO Salim Ramji in an exclusive conversation. Salim, so we all saw the ripple effects.
Great to be here, Katie.
And your average fee now is just 7 basis points across your lineup. The industry average, for context, 44 basis points. Set the scene for us. Why now?
Well, you know, in one sense, I will say Monday was a pretty joyous day here at Vanguard. And it was joyous because it really is a reaffirmation of our business model. We're owned by our clients. And so as a result, as we gain scale economies here at the company, we share those back with our clients. And that's not just been true since Monday, it's been true since 1975, since when we founded the company. And so this was continuing on a 2,000 price cuts, I think by our tally as of last week. Now it's 2,168 price cuts. Over 10 basis points. And so at a very low fee. And, you know, when you speak to our fixed income team, to Sarah Devereaux, our CIO, and our teams who run our active fixed income, part of the reason they're able to outperform is they have a much lower headwind from higher fees, and so they're able to take risks in a much better and more disciplined way. And so what this is really about is not just about delivering high-quality index management, but it's really about delivering high-quality investment management at a very low fee. And I think whether you're looking at active fixed income or whether you're looking at index fixed income or index equities, that's really what we've been about.
Right. Well, Salim, you make the point that a lot of people probably think of Vanguard and they don't think of active. And you do have, of course, active funds out there, but it's a pretty small percentage of your overall lineup, especially if you take a look at the ETF side of things. Should we expect to see more active fund launches from you?
Yeah, you know, our active management, the first Vanguard funds were actually active funds, if you go back to the 70s, and both we manage our active fixed income within Vanguard. We have a whole range of partners, sub-advisors that we work with for our fundamental active equities. And they're unified by the principle of being high quality at a low price. And yeah, Katie, you already have seen us doing a lot more in active ETFs. And I think you've seen that pick up over the past several months, and I hope and expect that that will continue over the next, this year and next year.
All right, so we'll keep an eye out for that. You were talking a little bit about, of course, how the ownership structure works at Vanguard, how basically a lot of the extra cash, the extra assets that you generate are funneled towards these fee cuts. But I'm curious, from where you sit, how do you balance lowering fees versus investing in the business? What does that decision tree look like?
Yeah, it's something we do very carefully here. This week is all about our fee cuts and giving back to our clients in the form of lower fees. We've also stepped up our investments in things like technology.
Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report.
Next year, because we're always trying to balance making sure that we've got high-quality products at a low cost, and we're delivering the right level of service to clients. We're investing in newer technologies to make our investing even more efficient, to make our client interfaces even more efficient. So that's always a balancing act here at Vanguard, just like it is at many companies, in terms of how do we think for the near term and how do we think for the medium to longer term. But I'd say one of the beauties of Vanguard, I think part of the original genius of Vanguard, is that when we've got a surplus after we've looked.
This is an attack, and USAID is just the beginning. It's USAID now, it's the Department of Education next, and it's an attack on our entire democratic government system.
Wired reports employees of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, have received orders to pause all international engagements amidst concerns the scientific agency could also soon face mass firings and have its mission throttled, including its work on developing wind energy. Meanwhile, workers of color at the Health and Human Services Department fear they could be directly targeted after their names and photos were published on a website called DEI Watch List, created by the American Accountability Foundation. The list of workers claims their so-called offenses include working on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and using pronouns in their bios. Democratic Congress members Judy Chu and Gwen Moore confronted House Speaker Mike Johnson Wednesday, showing up at his office during his meeting with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent to demand answers on Elon Musk's team gaining access to the Treasury Department's payment system. The lawmakers say Johnson hid Scott Bessent from them. In the Senate, Hawaii Democrat Brian Schatz led an overnight filibuster against the confirmation of Project 2025 architect Russell Vought to head the Office of Management and Budget.
All of us, Democrats, Republicans, independents, the media, which is so damn casual about what is happening, we have to understand that when you're in the middle of the fight, you're not sure if this is a historic moment. When you read about it in the past, you can identify that historic moment. When you observe it in a faraway place with a hard-to-pronounce name, you can identify what's happening, creeping fascism.
A coalition of labor groups filed a lawsuit Wednesday to prevent DOGE, Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, for attempting to take over the Labor Department and gaining access to its data. The agency holds sensitive data, likely including worker complaints against Musk and his companies. The plaintiffs include the AFL-CIO, that's the American Federation of Government Employees as well, Service Employees International Union, and the Economic Policy Institute. Labor Department workers rallied in D.C. Wednesday against an expected incursion by Elon Musk, joined by Democratic lawmakers. This is Michigan Congressmember Rashida Tlaib.
We don't get the benefits and the support and the protections, but for the fact that workers organized and they pushed back and they fought. And when we don't get it, we shut it down.
In more labor news, a former board member of the National Labor Relations Board, Gwen Wilcox, filed a lawsuit calling her firing by President Trump last month unprecedented and illegal, asking a federal court to reinstate her. NLRB members are Senate approved to fixed terms and can only be removed for, quote, neglect of duty or malfeasance, unquote. The CIA sent the White House an unclassified email with the first names and last name initials of workers hired in the past 2 years in response to an order by the Trump administration as it moves to drastically whittle down the federal workforce. Former CIA officials called the move a counterintelligence disaster, warning that the employees could easily be identified. Meanwhile, acting Deputy Attorney General Emil Bove, Trump's lawyer in his New York criminal election interference case, accused FBI leadership of insubordination after it refused to identify a core team of agents involved in the January 6th Capitol insurrection investigations. The Justice Department seeking data on over 5,000 FBI employees involved in those investigations. President Trump Wednesday signed an executive order to bar transgender students from school sports. The so-called Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports order directs federal agencies to withhold funding for schools that do not comply. This came as at least 15 attorneys general from Democratic-led states issued a joint statement vowing to protect gender-affirming care, calling Trump's order to rescind federal funding for the life-saving treatments, quote, wrong on the science and the law, unquote. Meanwhile, a federal judge in Washington, D.C. Tuesday temporarily blocked Trump's order that sought to move transgender women in federal prisons to men's wards and end their gender-affirming care. The three transgender
20 feet from where Wayne is standing, from where we're standing, and he's booking her. He's just really moving. So then I open the door and look, and here are 3 RCMP officers with their dog. And I said he went through the trees that way. Right through here. Oh, yeah. You can see the footprints.
The foot chase lasted over a kilometer before RCMP say the suspect took his own life. RCMP say the U.S. national suddenly tried to flee when he was called in for a second inspection here at Coots border crossing, a move that RCMP say would later lead to the man taking his own life. It's a show of force residents of this small Alberta town have never seen before.
And it was just like O.J. Simpson.
Tuesday morning, the sudden arrival of more than a dozen RCMP officers shutting down the highway and deploying a spike belt was only the start of a frightening ordeal for the O'Donnell family, watching the arrival of a getaway vehicle and police chase on their rural acreage.
It was just interesting until he hit the ditch and started running towards our son's house. And then it got real.
One of those officers told her the suspect was armed and to go to her basement, but her husband was outside.
Wayne was right here, shoveling snow. The fellow runs through our trees, like 15, 20 feet from where Wayne is standing, from where we're standing, and he's booking her. He's just really moving. So then I open the door and look, and here are 3 RCMP officers with their dog. And I said he went through the trees that way. Right through here. Oh, yeah. You can see the footprints.
The foot chase lasted over a kilometer before RCMP say the suspect took his own life. The Alberta Serious Incident Response Team is investigating.
It's unsettling in a small town like this. With all the problems that's going on with the border and the tariffs and everything, you wonder whether it's all a setup or something. I'm not sure, but...
It comes amid heightened tension over border security and as U.S. President Donald Trump continues to make good on promised deportations, sending illegal migrants to Guantanamo Bay in recent days.
We have the partnerships, the technology, and the resources in place to respond to the border and stop illegal activity.
The union representing border officers is raising concerns about coordination between various patrol teams, while it says hours are being reduced at 35 ports of entry amid ongoing challenges with resources.
We have staffing issues at a lot of port of entries, and we see the resources being thrown at what's going to happen between where most people cross. We have ports of entry operating we don't have x-ray machines. There's basic equipment and things that we really need.
Incidents reigniting calls for a border strategy that puts the safety and security of Canadians ahead of Americans.
The CBSA says it hasn't seen any increase in the number of people seeking asylum across Canada. In fact, it says there were twice as many claims for asylum last year between mid-September and mid-January as there was for the same period this year. The data since Trump's inauguration has not yet been released. In Coots, Sarah Offen, Global News.
We want to tell the Israeli defense minister that we are steadfast in Gaza. Despite the siege and despite everything, we are steadfast. God willing, we will not leave our country.
Point of time.
UN Secretary
General
Antonio Guterres responded Wednesday to President Trump's remarks.
And stemming those cancellations, which is exactly what they actually did for the quarter that they just reported, fiscal 2Q, where cancellations came in much lower than what they had originally projected, and so that kind of caused them to revise their expectations for the full year as well. So it's more, at this point, it's really more just about stemming churn and focusing more on keeping it's more customer retention rather than customer acquisition. But I think, soon as they kind of get their bearings back, they probably will, go into new modalities and get into newer products.
I asked Paul jokingly before how many suit jackets he can hang from his Peloton. But I mean, my point is, it's not just you don't just go out and buy the bike. That's not what they're really relying on. It's the subscription services, right?
Absolutely. So 70% of Peloton's revenue comes from subscription. Hardware, yes, is important, but the high margin portion of the business is as you pointed out, John, is subscription.
Do they move beyond the stuff that's in your house? Can I, subscribe to a Peloton app and pay them a monthly fee to have somebody yell at me while I go jogging down the street?
That's exactly what they've been trying. So they've been trying all kinds of different things. You don't necessarily need to be tied to the hardware. Or you don't need to own it. They've had different programs, rental programs, all kinds of things. Not all of them have necessarily worked, but that's why they're kind of now trying to focus on different things, including partner programs. So one of the things that they kind of mentioned for this quarter was they had this program with Costco, and that actually helped them sell more.
Argentina's far-right populist president, Javier Milei, says he's withdrawing Argentina from the World Health Organization, following in the footsteps of President Trump. Like Trump, Milei cited the UN agency's response to the COVID pandemic, namely its backing off of life-saving lockdowns. Last month, Milei gave a speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos, blasting feminism, LGBTQ communities, the fight against climate change, social welfare, and so-called wokeism. Mass demonstrations took place in Argentina following up protesters called Milei's hate speech. Ecuador's President Daniel Noboa has announced a series of major policy changes that also appear to echo Trump just days ahead of general election Sunday. These include a 27% tariff on Mexican imports and a plan to immediately militarize Ecuador's ports of entry, including temporarily sealing the border. Noboa is up against leftist Luis Gonzalez of the Citizen Revolution movement. Gonzalez is a protege of former President Rafael Correa, who's vowed to increase social spending and crack down on crime. Both the Argentine President Milei and the Ecuadorian President Noboa attended President Trump's inauguration. And California officials have accused President Trump of wasting billions of gallons of water after he ordered the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to open 2 dams in central California. Over the weekend, Trump declared on social media the water's flowing in California and claimed it was, quote, heading to farmers throughout the state and to Los Angeles. Neither claim is accurate. None of the 2.2 billion gallons discharged into the dry lake bed of Tulare Lake will flow to Los Angeles to help with wildfires, which have already been contained. Meanwhile, the water was released ahead of the dry summer months when it's most needed and before most farmers have been even planted their fields.
Members of your august body, who say whatever you want about them, generally like their own power, would willingly move to confirm a man in Russell Vought, who's before the Budget Committee, to head OMB when it is the position of that individual that the president has every right to completely bypass the Senate and the Budget Committee on matters of spending. What do you think is going to happen here?
I think everything being equal, Vought is going to win. I suspect virtually all Democrats will vote against him. I think all Republicans will vote for him. What Raphael Warnock was just talking about a moment ago about the devastating cuts to programs that working families, low-income people need is absolutely correct. And I'm glad that we fought back and, for the moment at least, we have managed to get that freeze rescinded. But the key point here is that what Trump did is illegal and unconstitutional. The power of the purse rests with Congress, your point, and not with the executive. You know, the founding fathers were pretty smart about that. They divided up the power. But I'll tell you something, when you talk about authoritarianism, Chris, it is not only vote and the power of the OMB and what Trump is doing, it is also, I'm sure you have noticed, his lawsuits against the media when they do things that he's not happy with. So you got a suit against ABC. You got a suit against the Des Moines Register. You got Meta apparently gave him $25 million today. So what goes on? You know, if you say something tomorrow that Trump doesn't like, maybe he will sue NBC. And maybe your bosses will say, hey, Chris, you got to calm it down a little bit. We can't afford $50 million to Trump. So this is a real movement toward authoritarianism. And when you add on top of that the movement toward oligarchy, three richest guys in America standing beside Trump at his inauguration, we got a lot of problems facing our country right now.
I just want to note, since you brought it up, one thing that has been amazing to me is all of the encouragement we've gotten from the folks here that run this news organization, that we're going to do what we do under the First Amendment, fairly and precisely, with neither fear or favor. And I'm confident in that. I really am. And I think your point about the suing is wild. I want to actually stay on that for one moment. I don't think we've ever seen president as plaintiff before. It's a very bizarre situation that I don't think everyone's gotten their head around. Right. There's a bunch of Supreme Court precedent about whether the president can be sued. But the idea of the president doing the suing and other people paying him settlements, that seems kind of odd.
Oh, it's not odd. It is extraordinarily dangerous. That is, if that's not undermining the First Amendment, I don't know what is. Right. So if you think that, people in media are not going to be looking over their shoulders, worrying about a lawsuit from Donald Trump, you are mistaken. So we are in a dangerous situation. We are in an unprecedented situation. But here's what I want to say to listeners who are justifiably very worried. Do not forget that while Republicans control the House and the Senate, their margins are slim. All right, they don't have 60 votes in the Senate. They got, a 4-vote majority in the House. That ain't a lot of votes. And a number of Republicans won by a small margin in Democratic districts. They are susceptible to citizen outrage. So get on the phone. If you see these guys doing something like wanting to give huge tax breaks to billionaires while they cut Medicare, if they want to go drill, baby, drill while we have been facing an existential threat of climate change, if they want to deport 20 million people in this country, stand up, fight back. We can beat them. So let's not act in a hopeless way. Oh, my God, we can't do anything. We can. Longer term, obviously, we need to do what the Democratic Party has not done, has become the party of the working class, develop a strong grassroots movement with labor unions, with young people, with people of color, and organize and fight back. The progressive agenda, and I say this over and over again, is the people's agenda. It is wildly popular. People understand the current healthcare system is broken. They want universal healthcare. Healthcare is a human right. They want to raise the starvation minimum wage
can I ask you about healthcare?
To a living wage. Yeah.
I mean, you've got, and it connects to your first point, which is that it's not like all this is a fait accompli. Robert Kennedy Jr., who you interviewed and you asked him about those onesies, which was an instantly iconic moment. I'm not going to play it now because I want to get your answer here. I don't think it's a sure thing that he's going to be confirmed. And I thought the concerns from some Republicans were quite persuasive, including Senator Cassidy, who used to be a doctor. What do you think?
Well, I sit next to Senator Cassidy. He was the ranking member, and I was the chair. Now I'm the ranking member. He's the chair. He is a doctor, and he's nobody's fool. He is concerned about Kennedy's absurd attacks and lies about vaccines and autism, and we will see what happens. What we should appreciate is there'll be an enormous amount of pressure on Cassidy, on other Republicans, but his line of questioning was, I think, very commendable.
Yeah, Senator Bernie Sanders, who asked Kennedy if he could just say whether vaccines and autism were linked, wouldn't answer his question. Thank you so much, Senator. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris.
Introducing Chewy is the proud partner of your Toronto Maple Leafs and their pets. At Chewy, you can get everything delivered for life with pets. Score pet faves at the Leaf Shop today.
Well, today, Donald Trump called Elon Musk a liar. He couldn't do it himself. He couldn't do it himself because he's afraid of Elon Musk. So you will be surprised to discover how far down the chain of command Donald Trump had to go to find someone
on day one.
to
Don't
call.
delay. Time is on your side. Do it now and keep adding skills. Brad, I'm often asked, what's the best investment I can make? It's really simple. It's yourself. Invest in your skills, your human capital. That pays off the best.
All right. I hope that pizza is epic for anybody who's watching this and trying to figure out how they do some financing after it. Dan, thanks so much for taking the time here with us today. Real pleasure.
Thank you, Brad. Take care.
Certainly, you too. Let's do a final check of the markets here. We're approaching 12 noon Eastern time, and we're taking a look at the U.S. major averages right now. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, you're seeing that in the red. That's lower by about 0.3%. The S&P 500, though, and the NASDAQ, they are both in positive territory, fractionally as it may be, holding on to some of those gains here out of the gates here this morning for the front half of today's trading session. I'm taking a brief look at what's driving this activity, and right now, of the sectors that are holding on to those gains right now, financials is leading the pack. Bringing up the caboose, though, is energy. Everyone, that's it for Wealth. I'm Brad Smith. Thank you for watching. You can stay tuned for Market Domination with Julie Hyman and Josh Lipton. That comes up at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. They'll count you down to and through the market close.
Welcome to Yahoo Finance Sports Report, a unique look at sports business brought to you by Yahoo Finance and Yahoo Sports. I'm your host, Joe Pompliano, and I'll be breaking down the financial side of the game for your financial gain. We'll go beyond the headlines, analyzing all the latest sports news, the teams, the trades, and billion-dollar deals, so you and your portfolio will win big. Catch Yahoo Finance Sports Report on Thursdays on all your favorite podcasts and streaming platforms.
It's time for Yahoo Finance's Market Minute. Stocks mixed. The S&P and NASDAQ moving higher as investors digest earnings and policy changes. Roblox, top trending ticker on Yahoo Finance, shares are sinking, seeing its biggest intraday decline since May of 2024 after reporting daily active users in its fourth quarter falling below analyst estimates. Also, Honeywell shares are lower after confirming plans to split into 3 publicly traded companies. That's amid pressure from an activist investor. Honeywell already announced a spin-off of its advanced materials business. It will now separate its aerospace and automation units. Shares of Apple supplier Skyworks are plunging after the company said increasing competition in the smartphone market could lead to a significant drop in sales. And that is your Yahoo Finance Market Minute. For more on what's trending on Yahoo Finance, scan that QR code on your screen to track the best and worst performing stocks of the session.
Welcome to Stocks in Translation, broadcasting from the New York Stock Exchange. I'm Jared Blickery, your host. The People's Voice is on assignment, and today we have Yahoo Finance senior reporter Alexandra Canal next to me. First, please like, subscribe, and comment on Stocks in Translation on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, or YouTube. And today we are welcoming Nick Colas, co-founder of DataTrek Research. Hello, guys. I am excited because I followed Nick for years. This is the first time we've met on camera. And today we're going to be talking about institutional investors as opposed to retail, tapping our guest's experience in the industry, including a stint with Mets owner Steve Cohen at SAC Capital back in the day. Our phrase of the day is smart money. It beats dumb money, but is there such a thing? Do institutional traders really have the inside edge? And this episode is brought to you by the number 42%. That is the share of zombie companies in the small cap Russell 2000 index. What is the magic threshold that triggers the zombie small cap apocalypse? So Nick, before we really dig in, what do you think of the market action so far this year? We are taping this, I should know for the viewers, on Fed Day, and there's been a lot happening recently.
There really has. I mean, just the last week, we've had everything from Treasury rates finally starting to break down because we were worried about 5% 10-year yields, and now that's gotten a little better. We're back down towards 4.6, 4.7, so that's a positive. Then we had this staggering news over the weekend about Chinese artificial intelligence that rocked the market on Monday. So it's really been like at least a month's worth of news in just the last couple of days.
Well, I want to get to our word of the day here, our phrase of the day, and we were talking about this just before the show. It is smart money, and I'll give you the definition. Is it formal? Well, we're just going to get to it. Smart money refers to institutional investors, hedge funds, pensions, and pros who are thought to have superior research, execution, and market access, often moving ahead of retail traders. So there's a lot of probably misinformation about what constitutes smart money versus dumb money. There was even a movie made about the latter. What do you think about these terms?
I don't like them very much. Having worked with institutional investors basically all my life, I can tell you that, yes, they are smart in the classic sense of the word. However, they have jobs to do, and sometimes those jobs don't necessarily fit with maximizing returns. So they might have a more risk-averse approach than their investors want that. They certainly have access to a lot more information than the average retail investor. That is absolutely true. But the most important thing about smart money versus dumb money is it's not about the information that you have that you use to make investment decisions. It's the process by which you make decisions. So, for example, you mentioned Steve at SAC.
Yes.
We had to go through a weekly meeting with an in-house psychologist every week for the first year, where we went through every single trade that we did and explain what our thought process was, what our stop levels were, what our take gain levels were. And he would really focus on how did you feel during that trade? Literally, how did your body feel? Were you relaxed? Were you anxious? How did you feel? Were you confident? What he was trying to get us to understand was, past a certain level of knowledge, your intuition is very powerful. And that intuition is really your secret sauce. It is what makes you a good versus bad trader. It isn't just what you know, it's how you execute on it. And it's that process that makes for great investors. Every great investor, from Peter Lynch to Julian Robertson to Steve as a trader, have a very specific process. So if you're smart if you follow your process, and you're dumb if you just roll the dice.
And I want to pick up on that point. You said a lot of institutional investors are risk averse, and it feels like there's a lot of risk on sentiment in the market. You can see the market concentration. Obviously, everything we saw with the DeepSeek sell-off concentrated in those very few big tech names. Is that a problem for markets down the line?
It is both the market's biggest feature and biggest bug, honestly, because you've got, call it 35% of the S&P in 7 names. You've got 45% of the S&P in tech plus the names that are tech but not really in the tech sector. Super concentrated, don't have that in Europe, don't have that in Japan. You do have it somewhat in China, but it's kind of landlocked tech. It's tech that only operates in China. The reason they're so concentrated, the reason they're so highly valued is because they have extremely high returns on capital. So if the average company around the world has a 10% return on capital, big tech has between 40 and 100% return on capital. Apple's return on capital is 100%, meaning that's what they make on their capital equity every single year, which is amazing. How do you value that? Is 30 times a multiple correct? That's what it trades for now, so fine, that's what the market says. But is 25 the right number or is 40 the right number? If Apple can start growing again, 40 is probably more the right number, but it's that tension that makes U.S. companies and U.S. equity indices so uncomparable to the rest of the world, and people get very confused about that.
Yeah, it almost seems like we have two issues of concentration. We have the concentration of the world's excess returns in the U.S. market, and then within the U.S. market, we have concentration which over the last couple of years has been in these mega caps that we talk about, Magnificent Seven. But when you go back through history, 100 years of stock market returns, concentration is not unique to this period.
Union and Economic
You'll
Policy
see comparisons
Institute.
to the dot-com boom and bust.
Rallied
How valid
in
are those?
D.C.
Are you
Wednesday
concerned
against
about
an
this at all in
expected
terms
incursion
of
by
an
Elon Musk,
inevitability
joined by
of a
Democratic
downturn?
lawmakers. This
So
is
I was
Michigan
SAC during
Congress
the
member
peak of the dot-com
Rashida
bubble,
Tlaib.
and then the first 18 months of its blow up.
So definitely boring time.
Oh, yeah. And first and foremost, the firm made a lot of money, so you can make money both ways. It doesn't matter what the direction of the market is. More broadly, I think the issue is, what do you think technology has done to indexes over the last 10 years? Because technology is a kind of winner-take-most phenomena, and we've seen that with Apple and Microsoft and the rest of the names we all know. There are no European Microsofts or Amazons or Apples. They're all here. And this is what we hear talking to European clients all the time is, thank goodness the U.S. market exists, because otherwise we wouldn't have exposure to these very important trends. So I think this is different from the late 90s because you have much more profitable, much more globally scaled companies. And don't forget, we've had like 20-odd turns of Moore's Law since the 1990s. So technology has gotten much more powerful. And that's what we see with the AI boom now. I mean, we've had 30 turns of Moore's Law since it was invented in the 60s. We went from basic PCs to AI.
And that's where the number of transistors roughly doubles every 18 months to 2 years. And so it's been wonderfully predicted.
Yeah, the computing power per dollar is Moore's Law. It's size and it's how much it costs to access computing power. And that's really the power that we've seen.
Refused to identify a core team of agents involved in the January 6th Capitol insurrection investigations. The Justice Department seeking data on over 5,000 FBI employees involved in those investigations. President Trump Wednesday signed an executive order to bar transgender students from school sports. The so-called Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports order directs federal agencies to withhold funding for schools that do not comply. This came as at least 15 attorneys general from Democratic-led states issued a joint statement vowing to protect gender-affirming care, calling Trump's order to rescind federal funding for the life-saving treatments, quote, wrong on the science and the law, unquote. Meanwhile, a federal judge in Washington, D.C. Tuesday temporarily blocked Trump's order that sought to move transgender women in federal prisons to men's wards and end their gender-affirming care. The 3 transgender prisoners who filed the lawsuit successfully argued the anti-trans order violates the 8th Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. A federal judge in Maryland has ordered a nationwide indefinite hold on President Trump's executive order blocking birthright citizenship. U.S. District Judge Deborah Boardman, a Biden nominee, ruled Wednesday that civil rights groups suing to stop Trump's order were very likely to succeed in their argument that it, quote, conflicts with the plain language of the 14th Amendment, unquote. In Texas, an agreement between state officials and the Trump administration will allow soldiers in the Texas National Guard to make immigration arrests at the border and help ICE detain and deport undocumented people. This comes as the Trump administration continues its campaign of mass deportations with more than 8,000 immigration arrests since January 20th. In Colorado, heavily armed ICE agents carried out large-scale immigration raids at apartment complexes across Denver and Aurora Wednesday. The Denver Post reports masked agents
try to find a way forward. So for more on this, we turn to Mike Dorning, who helps lead our congressional coverage as the deputy leader of our Capitol Influence team here in Washington. He's with me in the D.C. studio. So, Mike, I do wonder if this is a question really of who might be able to sway President Trump, if anyone, or who's doing the swaying here? Is it about
deep fundamental level, which is why they're basically flocked to crypto, because they understand what it is. They understand its technology. And let's face it, Bitcoin's the only technology that's never been hacked at the core level. The blockchain's never been hacked. How much can you say? You can't say that about any other technology on the planet.
Interesting.
Every company's been hacked. Every major technology, Tesla's been hacked, Microsoft's been hacked. There are hacker competitions that target those companies in a friendly way to show their security failures. We haven't had that with the
general way, like any normal administration would go and handle this, is the exact way the Senate's doing it, which is, hey, you're new in town, you want to deliver a win early, both for the president and for the Congress of the Republicans, and show you're helping with the border enforcement, the immigration crackdown, and that's something that, you could get all the Republicans behind. And then you come back with the more complicated tax bill. Speaker Johnson's just afraid that if you do it in two pieces, he's never going to be able to get the hardliners to agree to the tax bill without big spending cuts, and the more moderate members of the Republicans to agree to the big spending cuts. And they don't want to have any Democrats that they have to make a deal with. So that's the tension. And for a while, the Senate was waiting and saying, hey, okay, yeah, go to it, Mr. Speaker. And then, a month later, there's no plan. So the Senate's no plan. So the Senate's okay, train's leaving the station. We're going next week. You had your chance. So it's all in that morass at the moment. And of course, President Trump has seen that in these confirmations where all the senators who had problems with nominees just
officials in Panama. Rubio is heading to Costa Rica, then Guatemala today before making a trip in the Dominican Republic as part of his first foreign trip as Trump's Secretary of State. We'll have more on the trip after headlines. Businesses across the U.S., from child daycares to grocery stores, closed their doors Monday to mark a day without immigrants in a protest of the Trump administration's mass raids and deportations. Students also skipped school to join the peaceful action. Thousands took part in the streets in cities nationwide, including Phoenix, Arizona, New York, and Los Angeles. Protesters also rallied outside Trump Tower in downtown Chicago. This is Melanie, the daughter of undocumented immigrants, who held a sign that read, "Speaking out for immigrants who can't."
On the other side, I have immigrants built America, because who's someone who does your crops? It's immigrants. They're the ones in the fields. Who picks up your trash? It's immigrants. They're the ones that are cleaning out the offices, the bathrooms, everywhere you work. They're the ones that clean up. They're not the ones that are sitting in an office desk doing paperwork. They're the ones behind everything.
President Trump has named his former speech writer, Darren Beattie, to a senior position at the State Department. Beattie was fired in 2018 after CNN reported he'd spoken at a conference attended by white nationalists. Last October, Beattie wrote, quote, "Competent white men must be in charge if you want things to work," unquote. And in Germany, 160,000 demonstrators rallied at Berlin's Brandenburg Gate Sunday to condemn conservative leader Friedrich Merz for collaborating with the extreme right Alternative for Germany party to push an anti-immigrant measure. The bill ultimately failed after members of his own CDU party refused to support it. Merz has been favored to become Germany's next chancellor in the upcoming elections. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report.
Get angrier hardliners in one way or another. So it just creates more anger, more dissension, and more time burned up.
But the Democrats are
but
kind of...
they'll get those things done.
Yeah, the Democrats are kind of angry right now also, right? Is there any indication that they're going to be as willing to provide the necessary votes to get must-pass legislation over the finish line as they were, say, last Congress?
They're probably not going to be as willing to, because in the... moderates come to an agreement on the Republican side. Now, you do, again, have a president on the Republican side who has shown that he can force the members to do what he wants. So if he's willing to burn up his political capital and really put the pressure on House members, he could probably get all of this done.
Well, and as you already pointed out, it has been illustrated in the Senate as well, with his nominees being able to get confirmed or making it through key votes. I did want to point out today, though, Kash Patel in the Judiciary Committee, it was supposed to be a vote held today to advance him from committee to the floor, got pushed back. Is this just delay tactics on the part of Democrats again, or does this change the calculus as to whether or not he will ultimately be able to be confirmed?
I haven't seen anything that makes me think that it will change the calculus as to whether he will ultimately be confirmed. But we'll see.
Well, and in the meantime, the Democratic senators are trying to run out the clock here on Russ Vought for OMB director. They've been keeping the Senate floor occupied for the entirety of the hours allotted for debate here. It's still the expectation he gets final confirmation this evening, right after 7 p.m.
Yes, absolutely. But there's a purpose to this. In some ways, vote in most cases, or at least the portion of Americans that are even hearing of him now.
Yeah.
So by having this giant conflict, both for the general public and for their own base supporters, they're sending a message.
All right, Mike Dorning, always covering Capitol Hill for us. Thank you so much indeed. And as we consider this second administration as it is taking shape, we're going to get into what public opinion is actually suggesting about how Americans feel about these first few weeks. Cliff Young of Ipsos Polling will be with me next, right here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg.
Preventing this, I mean, obviously the yield surging is not a great thing for small caps either.
Yes, for exactly the reason we were talking about. If you are not making money, you need access to capital, and that's debt capital for the most part, because equity capital is pretty expensive for a small cap. So you're going to go out and issue debt capital, and two things matter. What's the yield on the Treasury, and how are corporate bond spreads, particularly high yield spreads, the amount that a company has to pay over Treasuries. Those have been declining. Those are at ridiculously low levels. Spreads are very, very tight versus Treasuries, but Treasuries themselves have seen a push up towards 5% as recently as just earlier this month. That will make every small cap investor a little bit uneasy, because if all of a sudden the cost of capital for a small cap company goes to, call it 11, 12, 13% from 8, 9, 10, all of a sudden they're paying more for capital, and some of those companies aren't going to make it. That's what makes them zombies. It's only a zombie if they can't get incremental funding to keep on the path towards growth. And that's a big mistake. People say any unprofitable company is a zombie. Not true. There's plenty of high-quality unprofitable companies because they have a clear track to profitability. But if you need capital, that's a problem if rates go up. So you're right. It's absolutely 100% rates.
And yields approaching 5%. It seems like you said, we're in the clear right now. We're hovering above 4.5%. Why is 5%? Is it a psychological level because traders aren't really used to that? Case, perhaps we're just in this higher yield environment and investors just need to get on board. Is it really so bad And if it is, why?
Yeah, 5% is an important level, and it isn't just over the last year or two. This goes back to pre-financial crisis. 5% was a level back then, and treasuries would very rarely go over 5%. It's fascinating because debt to GDP for this country was about 60% in 2004, 5, 6.
That seems really low.
Yeah, it is, because it's now 120%. It's double, and yet 10-year yields are exactly the same, which I think kind of challenges the idea that deficits inform yields. They clearly don't, because if they did, we'd have higher yields now than the mid-2000s. So the reason 5% is a barrier is because it's been a ceiling for a long time, and because it's kind of like those old-time maps where like they didn't know what the world looked like past a certain point, so they'd say, here be monsters. That's what happens with 5% 10 years. You get over 5 and here be monsters.
Right.
All of a sudden, we don't know what's going to happen. Should they go to 6? Should they go to 7? Who knows?
I got to ask you, do you think value is coming back in any way? We were talking about the interest rate situation. It really hasn't been a factor this century for long stretches of time, and I think a lot of it has to do with the interest rates situation, rates being low, but now with rates being higher and the market seeming to accept them, do you think there's a place for value in investors' portfolios?
It's very hard because the minute you sort of cycle into value, you're ignoring the most fundamental trend of the last 10 years and probably the next 20 years, which is technology. Yeah. There's not a lot of tech in the S&P 500 value, for example. Apple's in there, interestingly, as the biggest holding, but it's mostly financials, healthcare, things like that. So do you want to be very underexposed to technology? Look, if the answer is yes, because you're just very risk averse, value will do fine. There's still U.S. equities. Every U.S. equity sector except energy has outperformed rest of world stocks over the last 10 years. So, to your point about American exceptionalism, It isn't just tech. It's the entire ecosystem here. We're drawing capital and using it better than the rest of the world. And I don't see any reason for that to change anytime soon. So value's fine. It's just you have to accept the fact you're not going to get a lot of tech.
Speaking of diversification, you are very anti-international diversification. Explain to me why you think that's a waste of time.
Look, I think the underlying thesis behind any kind of diversification is you reduce risk and have the same level of returns. That's the principle. Markowitz is efficient frontier. That's what it's supposed to do. However, it assumes that every region has the same basic risk-return profile.
And 109,000 additional unintended pregnancies.
The CIA has offered its employees 8 months' salary and benefits in exchange for early retirement, becoming the first U.S. intelligence agency to offer buyouts to the entire staff. This comes after the White House said at least 20,000 civilian U.S. government workers, or about 1% of the federal workforce, have accepted a buyout offer advanced by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. On Monday, unions representing civilian government workers sued the U.S. Treasury and Secretary Scott Bessent, alleging the department illegally granted Elon Musk and his DOGE associates access to the personal information.
To a certain degree, united the country behind him, which he can probably use to push through legislation and pension reforms and things of that nature. Now, that being said, sovereignty has long been, understandably, because of the former Panama Canal Zone here that was operated exclusively by the United States for the majority of the 20th century, Panama has long been concerned with the question of sovereignty. So kowtowing to the United States on these issues is not popular, shall we say. Some of the protests that you saw, the burning of American flags, posters of Rubio with swastikas over his face, things like that. Most of that is carried out by a syndicalist group, a sort of union conglomerate, if you.
On Tuesday, Democratic lawmakers joined hundreds of protesters outside the Treasury Department to denounce Elon Musk's what they called hostile takeover of the federal civilian bureaucracy. The lawmakers were barred from entering the Treasury building. This is Massachusetts Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley.
There's a sign back there that says DOGE actually means dangerous oligarchs grab everything. Well, ain't that the truth? I am so tired of these billionaire boys and their grubby little hands grabbing at everything. Hands off our bodies, hands off our data, hands off our tax refunds, hands off our social security checks, hands off our Constitution, hands off our democracy, hands off.
Ukraine, a Russian strike on the town of Izium Tuesday killed 5 civilians, including a pregnant teenager. At least 55 others were wounded in the attack, which partially destroyed Izium City Council building. Elsewhere, Russian shelling killed 2 civilians in southern Ukraine, and a Ukrainian drone attack set a Russian oil depot near the Black Sea on fire. On Tuesday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he's open to having U.S. companies invest in Ukraine's rare earth metals industry after President Trump said military aid should be tied to securing the rights of minerals needed for U.S. high-tech and weapons industries. Trump made the remarks Monday.
We're telling Ukraine they have very
5 and 7 points. And we will see, obviously, because, he might buck the trend. But really, he has those 6 months to get things done and get his agenda pushed through.
Well, he certainly isn't waiting 6 months to try to get things done. He didn't even wait 6 hours, arguably, after he was inaugurated. So if we could get into some of his initiatives, beginning with the one that we've paid a lot of attention to here at Bloomberg, considering the cast of characters involved, the Department of Government Efficiency and Elon Musk and these wider efforts to trim down the size of the federal government. So far, is this popular?
Yeah, it is popular. And indeed, we pulled on a whole host of executive orders. Some aren't very popular. Some are. Those linked to government efficiency, saving, the public's money, are very popular. They're above 60%, which is strong. And once again, in a highly polarized America, public opinion in general is supporting at this moment those efforts.
Even the efforts being led by Elon Musk. I do wonder if there's any data on how people feel about him specifically as an unelected individual who is playing such a big role here.
People support those efforts. And Elon Musk, when you look across the board, the political figures, let's treat him as a political figure in this case,
sure,
across the board, he has pretty good favorability scores. High 30s, low 40s, once again, that's a good place to be in a highly polarized America like we see today.
Okay, so if what he is doing is popular, what's on the unpopular side of what we've seen so far? What is least popular?
Well, the administration has backtracked, right? And when they froze all funding to basically grants and services, they backtracked. They reversed the order. Only 20% of Americans agree with that executive order. So that's an example. Like when it really hits the pocketbook, when it affects sort of children or the family, when it is seen as unfair, those sorts of executive orders are less popular. But once again, there are some that are very popular, some that are less so.
So when we consider, for example, the effort to dismantle USAID or the pullback in foreign aid specifically, not necessarily the money that's being spent on social programs or what have you here at home, do people care about this, or is this largely something happening in NGO circles, those of us here in Washington that are paying attention?
We're worried about it in the Beltway. No one else is. The bubble, yes, exactly, the bubble. Basically, foreign aid has always been an easy target. Most Americans think that we're spending in the wrong place when we're spending on foreign aid. And it makes total sense from a strategic perspective that the administration is going after it, because really you don't have much public support for that. Indeed, those sorts of efforts have, have support in the mid-50s to the low 60s, depending on how you ask the question specifically. So once again, public opinion is behind it.
So if we consider foreign policy issues as well, not just in terms of foreign
aid. Meanwhile, the Senate Intelligence Committee has advanced the nomination of Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence on a party-line vote of 9-8, with all the committee's Republicans in support. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, UN officials report hundreds of women were raped and burned to death as M23 seized Goma, triggering chaos in the eastern city. The gruesome attacks occurred during a jailbreak in which thousands of men were able to escape the prison while the women's wing was set on fire. Restrictions imposed on M23 forces have blocked UN peacekeepers from reaching the prison to investigate. And in the Philippines, Vice President Sara Duterte has been impeached by House lawmakers and faces what could be removal from office later this year. Duterte has been accused of corruption and misusing millions of dollars in public funds and faced widespread backlash after she threatened to have Filipino President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., his wife and the Filipino House Speaker, assassinated. The Philippine Senate will hold its impeachment trial against Sara Duterte when Congress reconvenes in June. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now!'s Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Incarcerated in the United States. But the other things where Bukele agreed to. So I think that the Tren de Aragua and MS-13